My heart still raced from that courtroom moment, standing up to Judge Ramsey and feeling the jury's eyes on me, but I knew it was just the start. I'm Jamal Carter, 8 years old, and I was fighting to free my grandpa Marcus from a system that locked him up for being black and kind. After they arrested him at Rivera's bodega in Harlem, accusing him of a robbery he didn't do, I'd sworn to use every law book he'd taught me to read to bring him home. That first night at Mrs. Clara Jones's house, I barely slept, my mind spinning with the police's lies and Mr. Ruiz's shaky voice pointing at Grandpa. I kept seeing Grandpa's face behind that glass at Rikers, his 67-year-old shoulders slumped, telling me to focus on school. But how could I, when the world was so unfair? Mrs. Clara, with her warm hugs and sharp eyes, said it was racism, plain and simple, and it burned me up inside. I wasn't just fighting for Grandpa. I was fighting the idea that people like us didn't deserve justice. So, I kept my rights diary close, scribbling every detail, and ran my book club at the Harlem Library, teaching kids to question the system. But I needed more than notes and hope, and that's when Ms. Aisha Thompson walked into my life, a lawyer with a fire in her soul and a past that made her understand my fight. Ms. Aisha showed up at Mrs. Clara's brownstone a week after the hearing, her braids pulled back, carrying a laptop and a story that matched mine. My brother was locked up for nothing when I was 17, she told me, her voice steady but raw. I became a lawyer to stop it happening to others. Your grandpa's case, Jamal, it's personal. I showed her my notebook, pages filled with discrepancies, like how the police claimed the bodega's footage was lost after I'd pointed out it'd clear Grandpa. She read my notes on Terry v. Ohio and grinned. You're a force, kid. I liked her. She didn't talk to me, she talked with me, like Grandpa did. We planned to get me into court as Grandpa's legal advisor, a long shot, but Ms. Aisha knew New York law allowed it if we proved I wasn't just a kid with a loud mouth. I thought about Grandpa, who'd wanted to be a lawyer but couldn't afford it back when schools turned black folks away. I was carrying his dream, and it felt heavy, but his stories of marching in Montgomery gave me strength. I wasn't scared of Judge Ramsey's scowl or Prosecutor Nathan Caldwell's slick lies, I was scared of failing Grandpa. Caldwell was the one pulling the strings, and the more I learned about him, the more I saw a man who'd do anything to win. He was 38, tall and polished, with a smile that fooled TV cameras but not me. Mrs. said he was running for mayor, and a big case like Grandpa's was his ticket to fame. I overheard him at the courthouse, laughing with a cop about cleaning up Harlem, and it made my stomach twist. He wasn't just after Grandpa, he wanted to look tough on crime, and black men were his easy targets. Caldwell's confidence came from power, from knowing the system bent his way, and it made him dangerous. He'd already gotten to Mr. Ruiz, who I'd visit soon, and I suspected he was leaning on Detective Miller, the officer who'd cuffed Grandpa too tight. I wrote in my diary, Caldwell's the puppet master, but puppets have strings to cut. To fight back, I started a new plan, a Justice Quilt project with my book club. Each kid sewed a patch with a word like equality or truth, telling stories of unfairness they'd seen, like cops hassling their uncles or teachers skipping them for awards. We'd hang it at the community center to show Harlem's pain wasn't invisible. 20 kids joined, their chatter loud as we stitched, and I felt proud, but also sad, hearing how many of us carried the same hurt. One girl, Tiana, sewed freedom and whispered about her dad, stopped by police for jogging. I hugged her, thinking of Grandpa, and promised our quilt would make people listen. Ms. Aisha loved the idea and said it'd inspire the jury to see Harlem's heart. She also got me posting short videos on Instagram, explaining rights like, you don't have to talk to cops without a lawyer. My first post got 5,000 likes, and kids messaged me, saying they felt braver. It was like Grandpa's voice was in me, saying, knowledge is power, Jamal. But Caldwell wasn't sitting still. At Grandpa's next hearing, he brought new evidence, a witness who claimed Grandpa was at the bodega during the robbery. I knew it was a lie. Grandpa was at a doctor's visit, 4 miles away, with a time-stamped receipt I'd found in his coat. Ms. Aisha filed a motion to let me advise Grandpa, and Judge Ramsey, her glasses glinting with doubt, demanded I prove I knew the law. My hands shook, but I stood in that huge courtroom, facing her and the jury, and answered her questions. "What's the Fourth Amendment protect?" she snapped. "Illegal searches, ma'am, like when they patted down my grandpa without cause," I said, citing Mapp versus Ohio. Jurors leaned forward, one man nodding, and I felt a spark of hope. Ramsey grilled me for 20 minutes, asking about hearsay and precedents, and I didn't miss a beat, thanks to Grandpa's books and Ms. Aisha's coaching. She finally said, "You can consult, but don't speak in court," her voice tight, like she hated admitting I was right. Caldwell smirked, but I saw worry in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to fight like this. After, Ms. Aisha took me to see Mr. Ruiz at his bodega, hoping to learn why he'd lied. He was nervous, his hands fidgeting, and said, "I got debts, kid. They said I'd lose everything." I felt bad for him, but angry too. His lie was keeping Grandpa locked up. Ms. Aisha asked if anyone pressured him, and he glanced away, muttering about big shots offering to save his store. I thought of Caldwell, and my heart sank. Was he behind this? Back at Mrs. Clara's, I couldn't shake Mr. Ruiz's scared face. I wrote in my diary. "He's trapped, like Grandpa, but I won't let them win." Mrs. Clara saw me writing and said, "You're carrying a lot, Jamal, but you're not alone." She told me about her own fight, picketing for fair housing in the 1970s, and it made me see her strength, not just her kindness. I hugged her, grateful for her, Ms. Aisha, and my book club kids, who were sewing patches for Grandpa's freedom. The drama was building, and I felt it in my bones. Caldwell sent a letter to Ms. Aisha, warning her to drop the case, and someone left a note on Mrs. Clara's door, "Back off, or else." My stomach twisted, but I wasn't stopping. I started a "Letters for Justice" campaign, asking kids to write to the judge about Grandpa's good deeds, like fixing bikes for free or teaching history. We got 50 letters, and Ms. Aisha said they'd show the jury who Grandpa really was. As the trial loomed, I visited Grandpa again, his face thinner but his eyes bright when he saw my quilt sketch. "You're making me proud, Jamal," he said, and I choked back tears. I knew Caldwell was planning something big, maybe more fake evidence, but I was ready to face him, for Grandpa, for Harlem, for every kid who'd ever been told they didn't matter. This wasn't just a case, it was a war against a system that saw us as less, and I was fighting with everything I had. My name is Jamal Carter, and at 8 years old, I was learning that fighting for my Grandpa Marcus meant staring down a system that judged us by our skin before our hearts. After I stood up in that Manhattan courtroom, my voice shaking as I called out Prosecutor Nathan Caldwell's lie about Grandpa confessing to a robbery he didn't do, I felt like I'd lit a spark, but the weight of what came next pressed heavy on my chest. Grandpa was still in Rikers Island, his 67-year-old body aching in a cold cell, and every night without him felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Mrs. Clara Jones, the neighbor who'd taken me in, sat me down with a mug of tea and said, "Jamal, this ain't just about a robbery. It's about folks thinking black men like your grandpa don't deserve fairness." Her words cut deep, stirring a mix of anger and resolve in me. I couldn't let Grandpa, who'd raised me since my parents died when I was 4, stay locked up for being kind at Rivera's bodega. I'd read his law books, tracing words like justice with my small fingers, and I knew I had to keep fighting, not just for him, but for every kid in Harlem who'd seen the same unfairness. Mrs. Clara's living room became my war room, her old couch sagging under piles of Grandpa's legal texts. I'd found a police report that said the robber was 6 feet tall, but Grandpa was 5'10", a detail I clung to like a lifeline. I wrote it in my rights diary, a notebook I'd started for my book club at the Harlem Library, where I taught kids to question the system. But I needed help, and that's when Ms. Aisha Thompson knocked on our door. She was a lawyer, tall with braids and eyes that held both fire and pain. "I saw your flyer for the book club," she said, sitting across from me. "Your grandpa's case, it's why I do this work. My brother was arrested for nothing when I was young, and it broke our family." I showed her my notes, pages of scribbled case law, and she leaned forward, amazed. "You're 8 and citing Terry versus Ohio. Jamal, you're something else." I liked how she saw me, not as a kid, but as a fighter, and I felt Grandpa's dream of being a lawyer alive in me, pushing me to keep going despite the fear that Caldwell would crush us. Nathan Caldwell scared me more than I'd admit. He wasn't just a prosecutor, he was a man who wielded power like a blade, cutting down anyone who stood in his way. At 38, with his sharp suits and TV-ready smile, he was building a name as Harlem's crime fighter, but I saw the truth in his cold eyes. He needed Grandpa's conviction to win votes for mayor. I overheard him at the courthouse, joking with Detective Ryan Miller about keeping Harlem in line, and it made my stomach twist. Caldwell wasn't just after Grandpa, he was after control, using black men as stepping stones. I suspected he'd pressured Mr. Victor Ruiz, the bodega owner, whose shaky accusation started this mess. I wrote in my diary, "Caldwell's building a castle of lies, but lies can fall." To fight back, I started a justice quilt with my book club, a new idea to show Harlem's pain. We met at the community center, 20 kids stitching patches with words like truth and hope. I sewed freedom, thinking of Grandpa's tired smile at Rikers. Tiana, a quiet girl, stitched dignity and whispered about her cousin, stopped by police for biking. Her story hurt, but it made our quilt stronger, a tapestry of our fight against a system that saw us as threats. "This'll hang in court one day," I told them, and their cheers warmed me, easing the ache of missing Grandpa. I also launched a Letters for Justice campaign, asking kids to write to Judge Eleanor Ramsey about Grandpa's kindness, how he'd fixed their bikes or taught them chess. We got 60 letters, each one a brick in our defense. Ms. Aisha said they'd show the jury Grandpa's heart, but I hoped they'd show Ramsey hers was wrong. Ms. Aisha was our anchor, but she carried her own scars. Over coffee at Mrs. Clara's, she told me how her brother's arrest pushed her to law school, but also left her mom broken. "I see him in you, Jamal," she said, her voice soft. "You're fighting for more than Marcus." I nodded, feeling the weight of her trust. We planned to get me into court as Grandpa's legal advisor, a bold move that needed Judge Ramsey's approval. Mrs. Clara, who'd marched for fair housing in the 1970s, helped us strategize. "Ramsey's tough, but she's not above the law," she said, her eyes sharp. I loved her strength, how she'd faced hate and still stood tall, and it made me braver. We also visited Mr. Ruiz at his bodega, hoping to uncover why he'd lied. He was jittery, his hands wiping the counter over and over. "I got debts, kid," he muttered. "They said I'd lose my store." When Ms. Aisha asked who they were, he clammed up, but I saw fear in his eyes, fear of Caldwell, I was sure. The hearing to let me advise Grandpa was like walking into a storm. Judge Ramsey's courtroom felt like a trap, her gaze cold as she demanded I prove I knew the law. My knees wobbled, but I thought of Grandpa, who'd faced worse in the 1960s, and stood straight. "What's the Sixth Amendment guarantee?" she asked, expecting me to falter. "The right to confront witnesses, ma'am, like in Crawford versus Washington," I said, my voice clear. Jurors leaned in, one woman's eyes wide, and I felt their hope lift me. For 25 minutes, Ramsey fired questions, about searches, evidence, precedents, and I answered each, drawing on nights spent memorizing Grandpa's books. MS. Aisha's proud nod kept me steady, but Caldwell's smirk made my skin crawl. He whispered to Detective Miller, and I knew they were plotting. Ramsey finally said, "You can consult, but don't speak in court," her words clipped, like she hated my win. The jury clapped softly, and I sat, heart pounding, knowing I'd shaken her. But Caldwell hit back hard. That night, someone left a note on Mrs. Clara's door, drop the case, or regret it. Mrs. Clara burned it in the sink, her hand steady. They're scared, Jamal, she said, but I saw worry in her eyes. At Rikers, Grandpa looked thinner, his voice hoarse. You're doing too much, son, he said, but I shook my head. I'm doing what you taught me, Grandpa, standing up. His smile, small but real, fueled me. Ms. Aisha got a call from Caldwell's office, offering a plea deal, 3 years. He's desperate, she said, but I knew he was dangerous. I started an Instagram page, posting quick videos about rights, like, cops need a reason to stop you. It got 8,000 followers in days, kids saying they felt stronger. But I also found a new clue, a bodega receipt showing Mr. Ruiz's store was in debt to a company tied to Caldwell's cousin. Was this why he lied? As the trial loomed, I felt the system closing in, but my quilt, my letters, and my fire kept me fighting. This was for Grandpa, for Harlem, for every black kid told they're not enough. I'm Jamal Carter, 8 years old, and standing in the Manhattan courthouse felt like facing a giant, but I wasn't backing down, not with my Grandpa Marcus's freedom on the line. The trial had begun, and every moment was a battle against a system that saw Grandpa's black skin as a guilty verdict before he even spoke. After months of fighting, from stitching our justice quilt to sending letters to Judge Eleanor Ramsey, I'd learned racism wasn't just a word. It was a force, woven into lies and power, and prosecutor Nathan Caldwell was its sharpest weapon. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension, and I sat beside Ms. Aisha Thompson, my hands gripping my rights diary, ready to guide Grandpa through the fight of our lives. Grandpa, looking frail after 90 days in Rikers Island, gave me a small nod, his eyes saying he believed in me, and that trust was heavier than any law book I'd ever read. I knew Caldwell was coming for us, but I also knew the truth was our shield, and I'd wield it no matter how scared I felt inside. The trial opened with Caldwell striding before the jury, his voice smooth as he painted Grandpa as a menace, twisting his civil rights protests from the 1960s into proof of a rebellious nature. I wanted to shout that Grandpa's only crime was helping a stranger at Rivera's bodega, but Ms. Aisha squeezed my hand, whispering, "Wait for our turn." Caldwell's lies stung, especially when he called Mr. Victor Ruiz to the stand. Mr. Ruiz, his eyes darting, swore Grandpa had stormed his store, demanding cash. I knew he was lying, his store was drowning in debt, and someone had scared him into pointing at Grandpa. Ms. Aisha stood, her voice steady, and asked, "Mr. Ruiz, isn't it true your business owes $150,000, and you met Detective Ryan Miller before changing your story?" Ruiz stammered, sweat beading on his forehead, and admitted meeting Miller but denied pressure. Jurors shifted, one woman scribbling notes, and I felt a flicker of hope. I whispered to Ms. Aisha, "Ask about his phone records." She nodded, producing a log showing calls from a number linked to Caldwell's office. "Who called you, Mr. Ruiz?" she pressed. Caldwell objected, but Judge Ramsey, her face tight, allowed it. Ruiz mumbled, "I don't know," but the jury's eyes narrowed, and I knew they sensed the truth. Caldwell was a storm, though, and he didn't flinch. He was 38, with a mayor's race in his sights, and his ambition made him ruthless. I'd seen him outside court, shaking hands with rich men in suits, and I'd heard him tell Miller, "This case will make Harlem respect order." To him, Grandpa was a pawn in a game to control our neighborhood, and I was a nuisance he underestimated. But I wasn't alone anymore. My Instagram videos, teaching kids about their rights, had 20,000 followers, and our justice quilt hung at the community center, its patches shouting Harlem's pain. I'd started a new project, too, a truth wall, where kids painted messages about unfair treatment on a mural outside the courthouse. "My brother got stopped for nothing," one read, and it made passers-by stop and think. The wall grew daily, and reporters snapped photos, calling me Harlem's young lawyer. It felt good, but also heavy. I was fighting for Grandpa, but also for every kid whose story was on that wall. Then the trial took a dark turn. Ms. Aisha woke up sick, her face pale from what she suspected was tampered food at a diner. "I'm okay, Jamal," she said, but her hands shook. In court, she asked for a delay, but Judge Ramsey smirked. "The trial moves forward, Ms. Thompson." Caldwell grinned, sensing weakness, and I felt a chill. "MS." Aisha whispered, "We can't stop now," and I knew we had to act. I tugged her sleeve and said, "Let Grandpa speak for himself today, with me helping." She hesitated, then nodded. "Your Honor," she said, voice faint, "Mr. Carter will represent himself, with Jamal as his advisor." Caldwell laughed, but Ramsey allowed it, her eyes glinting like she expected us to fail. I moved to Grandpa's side, my heart pounding, and whispered questions for him to ask Detective Miller, who took the stand next. Grandpa's voice, weak at first, grew strong as he asked, "Detective, why does your report say the suspect was 6 feet, when I'm 5'10"? Miller squirmed, saying it was a typo, but I had Grandpa push harder. "Isn't it true you've faced 5 complaints for targeting black men in Harlem?" Miller's face reddened, and he snapped, "Some folks need more watching." The jury gasped, 2 men exchanging looks, and I knew we'd struck a nerve. But Caldwell wasn't done. He called a new witness, a woman who claimed she saw Grandpa near the bodega at the robbery's time. I knew it was impossible. Grandpa was at a doctor's appointment, 4 miles away, with a receipt I'd kept. I whispered to Grandpa, "Ask her what she was wearing." He did, and she faltered, unable to recall. Ms. Aisha, rallying despite her illness, stood and showed the jury a photo from that day, proving the woman was elsewhere. "Perjury is serious," she said, and the witness shrank. Jurors murmured, and I felt we were winning, but then a bailiff slipped Ms. Aisha a note, "Quit, or your family pays." My stomach dropped. She had a young daughter, and I saw fear in her eyes. "We keep going," she whispered, but I wondered how much more we could take. The turning point came when Ms. Lena Morales, a city planner I'd met through my truth wall, slipped into court. She'd seen my videos and contacted Ms. Aisha, saying she had proof the robbery was a setup. Lena, nervous but brave, handed us emails showing Hudson Realty, a company tied to Caldwell's cousin, wanted Grandpa's community organizing stop to clear Harlem for condos worth $250 million. "They used arrests to scare people," she whispered. I urged Ms. Aisha to question Miller about it. "Detective, did you meet Hudson Realty's CEO last month?" she asked. Miller denied it, but Lena's email showed a meeting date. Caldwell objected, shouting, "Irrelevant." But Ramsey, cornered by the jury's stares, allowed it. The room buzzed, and I saw doubt in a juror's eyes, a woman who'd smiled at me earlier. I wrote in my diary, "The truth is breaking through, but Caldwell's fighting dirty." That night, at Mrs. Clara's, I couldn't sleep, thinking of Grandpa's frail frame and Ms. Aisha's courage. Mrs. Clara, who'd faced tear gas in the 1970s, said, "Racism wants you to give up, Jamal, but you're showing Harlem how to stand." Her words lifted me, but I felt the system's claws, Caldwell's threats, Ramsey's bias, Miller's lies. I added a patch to our quilt, courage, and prayed we'd win. The trial was a war, and I was a kid, but I was fighting for Grandpa, for Harlem, for every name on our truth wall. Caldwell thought he'd break us, but he didn't know our strength. I'm Jamal Carter, 8 years old, and I learned that truth can shatter lies, but only if you're brave enough to wield it. The Manhattan courthouse was a battlefield, and I'd fought with everything I had to free my Grandpa Marcus from a system that saw his black skin as a crime. After exposing Detective Ryan Miller's bias and Ms. Lena Morales's emails linking prosecutor Nathan Caldwell to a scheme to steal Harlem's heart, I felt hope, but also dread. Nathan Caldwell wasn't the kind to lose gracefully. He was a predator, his mayoral dreams built on crushing folks like us, and I knew he'd strike back. But as the trial's final days unfolded, I held tight to my rights diary, its pages filled with our fight, and the love of Harlem, from Mrs. Clara Jones's fierce hugs to Ms. Aisha Thompson's unyielding spirit. Grandpa, worn thin after 90 days in Rikers Island, looked at me with eyes that said we were close, and I swore I'd bring him home, no matter what Caldwell threw at us. The courtroom buzzed as the fourth day began, jurors watching me like I was more than a kid, their faces softening when I adjusted Grandpa's tie. Ms. Aisha, still shaky from her illness, stood tall, her braids gleaming under the lights. Caldwell called a forensic expert, claiming a fingerprint from the bodega matched Grandpa's, but I'd noticed something in the report. It was enhanced after my courtroom questions. I whispered to Ms. Aisha, "Ask about the original print." She did, and the expert admitted the first analysis was inconclusive, only fixed after Detective Miller's input. Jurors frowned, one man shaking his head, and I felt the tide turning. Ms. Aisha pressed, "Isn't it unusual to alter evidence mid-trial?" The expert stammered, and Caldwell's cool mask slipped, his jaw tight. I wrote in my diary, "He's scared. Truth is louder than his lies." Caldwell was a master of control, but I saw cracks. He'd built his career on convictions, mostly black men, and I'd heard him tell a reporter, "Harlem needs discipline." His words chilled me. He didn't see us as people, just obstacles. I suspected he'd orchestrated the threats against Ms. Aisha, like the note warning her family, and the slashed tires on Mrs. Clara's car. He was 38, with a smile that fooled voters, but I saw a man who'd sell his soul to win. Yet, I wasn't alone. My truth wall outside the courthouse, painted with kids' stories of unfair stops, had grown to 50 feet, and my Instagram videos hit 30,000 followers, with messages like, "Keep fighting, Jamal." I started a Harlem Harmony Night, a new idea where neighbors shared meals and planned legal workshops, drawing 200 people. Mrs. Clara, who'd faced racism in the 1970s, led a prayer, her voice strong, "We rise together." It warmed me, but I missed Grandpa's laugh at those gatherings. The trial's climax came when Ms. Lena Morales returned, her hands trembling but her voice clear. She'd risked her job to give us emails showing Hudson Realty, run by Caldwell's cousin Ethan Grant, had framed Grandpa to silence his protests against their $250 million condo project. Ms. Aisha called her to the stand, asking, "Did Hudson Realty plan to use arrests to force Harlem sales?" Lena nodded, presenting a memo naming Grandpa as a threat. Caldwell leaped up, shouting, "This is speculation," but Judge Ramsey, under the jury's watchful eyes, allowed it. I whispered, "Ask about Caldwell's meetings." Ms. Aisha showed a photo of Caldwell dining with Grant at a Wall Street club, taken by Lena's friend. "Mr. Caldwell, did you discuss framing my client?" she asked, turning to him. The jury gasped, and Ramsey's gavel pounded, but the question landed. Caldwell's face paled, and I knew we'd hit his core. But danger surged. That morning, someone had spray-painted "Traitor" on Ms. Aisha's office door, and she'd gotten a call saying her daughter was watched. She hid it from me, but I saw her clutch a photo of her girl. "I'm scared, Jamal," she admitted later, her voice low. "But your grandpa's fight is mine." Her courage burned in me, and I hugged her, feeling like she was family. Mrs. Clara, too, stood fierce, organizing a neighborhood watch after her car was vandalized. "They want us quiet, but we're loud," she said, her eyes blazing. I added a "Unity" patch to our justice quilt, displayed at Harmony Night, and kids read their letters for justice aloud, their voices echoing Grandpa's kindness. Over 150 letters had reached Ramsey, and I prayed they'd soften her heart. Caldwell tried one last trick, recalling Mr. Victor Ruiz to claim Grandpa had threatened him about a deal. I knew it was a lie. Ruiz's store was tied to Hudson Realty's loans. Ms. Aisha, fueled by Lena's evidence, asked, "Mr. Ruiz, did Hudson Realty offer to clear your $150,000 debt for your testimony?" Ruiz froze, then nodded, voice barely audible. "They said I'd lose everything." The courtroom erupted, jurors whispering, and Caldwell's objection was drowned out. Ramsey's face tightened. she couldn't ignore this. Sensing defeat, Caldwell stood, his voice flat. The state moves to dismiss charges against Marcus Carter, in the interest of justice. My heart leaped, but Ms. Aisha wasn't done. We demand dismissal with prejudice, she said, and we're filing a civil rights suit against you, Mr. Caldwell, and Hudson Realty. Ramsey granted it, her gavel heavy, and I ran to Grandpa, his arms wrapping me tight as tears fell. Grandpa walked free after 90 days, his steps slow but proud, and Harlem cheered outside, the truth wall glowing with new messages. Ms. Lena had given her emails to a reporter, and by evening, NBC aired a story on Hudson's scheme, naming Caldwell and Grant. FBI agent Carlin Gwynn, who'd met Ms. Aisha after Harmony Night, announced an investigation, her team seizing 500 pages of Hudson's records. I felt joy, but also sorrow. Grandpa's freedom came at a cost. MS. Aisha's daughter needed protection, and Mrs. Clara's car was scrapped. I started a Heroes Fund at Harmony Night, raising $5,000 for them, kids donating quarters with shy smiles. You saved my grandpa, I told them, choking up. My Instagram hit 50,000 followers, and I posted, "Justice starts with us." For the 25 to 55 audience, this victory is a call to act, join a watch group, fund a cause, or paint a truth wall. The pain of racism, from Caldwell's schemes to Ruiz's fear, shows the system's depth, but our love, from quilts to letters, proves we're stronger. That night, at Mrs. Clara's, Grandpa held me, his voice soft. "You're my hero, Jamal." I cried, feeling the weight of our fight lift, but knowing Caldwell's shadow lingered. The FBI's probe was just starting, and I sensed a bigger storm coming. But for now, Grandpa was home, Harlem was rising, and I'd shown racism could be fought, one truth at a time. I'm Jamal Carter, 9 years old now, and standing on the steps of the New York State Capitol in Albany, I felt the weight of a year that changed me forever. My grandpa Marcus was free, his wrongful arrest for a robbery at Rivera's bodega behind us, but the scars of fighting a system that branded us guilty for being black lingered like shadows. The battle had been fierce, Nathan Caldwell's lies, Judge Eleanor Ramsey's bias, and a real estate scheme to steal Harlem's soul. But we'd won, not just for Grandpa, but for every heart that joined our fight. As I watched Harlem rebuild, I carried a truth heavier than my rights diary: racism could be challenged, but only with courage, love, and a voice that refused to be silenced. A year after Grandpa's release, I stood taller, not just in inches, but in purpose, knowing our story had sparked a fire that wouldn't fade. The Capitol's marble gleamed as Governor Daniel Pierce stepped to a podium, his voice echoing over a crowd of reporters and Harlem neighbors. "Today, we sign the Carter Justice Act," he said, ensuring transparency in our courts and accountability for misconduct. I held Grandpa's hand, his 68-year-old fingers strong again, and felt pride swell in my chest. The act was born from our fight, mandating oversight boards to review judges and prosecutors like Ramsey and Caldwell, who'd resigned in disgrace. FBI agent Carlin Gwynn, who'd launched a probe after Ms. Lena Morales's emails exposed Hudson Realty's plot, announced 18 indictments, including Caldwell, his cousin Ethan Grant, and Detective Ryan Miller. Their scheme to frame Grandpa, targeting Harlem for a $250 million condo project, had crumbled, and 20 wrongful convictions were overturned, families reunited because we dared to speak. Ms. Aisha Thompson, my lawyer and hero, stood beside us, her smile fierce despite the threats she'd endured. "This is for Harlem," she whispered, and I nodded, thinking of her daughter, now safe, thanks to our Heroes Fund. Harlem was alive, its spirit unbroken. Grandpa used his $1.2 million settlement to build the Carter Unity Center, a 12,000 square foot haven where I led legal workshops for kids, teaching them to write justice pledges, promises to stand against unfairness. Over 300 kids joined, their pledges taped to the walls, a rainbow of hope. I started a Future Voices podcast, recording stories of racism from teens across the U.S., hitting 2 million downloads. My favorite episode was with Mrs. Clara Jones, who shared her 1970s fight for fair housing, her voice cracking as she said, "Jamal, you gave us back our fight." Her strength, woven into our justice quilt, now hung in the center, its 50 patches a testament to Harlem's heart. I also launched a Rights Riders bike club, where kids cycled Harlem, handing out legal guides. We rode 10 miles weekly, our laughter drowning out the pain of the past, and I felt Grandpa's pride in every pedal. The courtroom where it all began, Manhattan's courtroom 4A, was different now. Judge Sofia Alvarez, a fair Latina jurist, called Grandpa and me to testify in a hearing on judicial reform. I sat in the witness box, my suit a bit snug, and spoke of Caldwell's cruelty, how he'd used racism to climb, targeting black men to scare voters. He thought we'd break, I said, but we built instead. Jurors from Grandpa's trial, invited as guests, nodded, one woman wiping tears. She told me after his release, "You had us at not guilty, Jamal." Their faith healed something in me, a wound from seeing Grandpa cuffed. Ms. Aisha presented data. Black New Yorkers were 6 times more likely to be arrested than whites in 2024. Jamal's fight changed that, she said, and Judge Alvarez created the Carter Youth Law Fund, offering scholarships for kids like me to study law. I was its first recipient, set for when I'm older, though I already taught at the Unity Center, my voice steady as I explained rights. Caldwell's fall was complete, but it wasn't enough. He'd been a symbol of a system that thrived on silence, and I'd seen his kind before, in teachers who doubted me, cops who stared too long. His indictments, splashed across CNN, showed a man undone by greed, but I wondered if he'd ever see us as human. I didn't hate him. I pitied him, trapped by a need to control. Ms. Lena, who'd risked everything, now led a city task force on housing equity, ensuring Harlem's 600 homes stayed affordable. Her courage, sparked by my truth wall, reminded me that one voice could ripple. The wall, now a city landmark, bore 200 messages, and I added one: love wins. A new idea grew, a Harlem Youth Summit, where 500 teens met to plan anti-racism projects. I spoke, my voice cracking as I shared Grandpa's arrest, the fear, the fight. "Racism wants you small," I said, "but you're giants when you stand." They cheered, and I felt my parents' spirits, gone but guiding me. Grandpa, on the summit's board, grinned, his limp gone, and said, "You're my legacy, Jamal." Mrs. Clara, now a center volunteer, organized a mural, 60 feet wide, showing Grandpa and me, captioned, "Harlem's Heart." Kids painted it, their hands messy with hope, and I cried, seeing our story immortalized. Reflecting on my journey, I learned lessons that burn in me. Racism is a machine, grinding down hope, but knowledge is a wrench to jam its gears. I learned that courage isn't fearless, it's acting despite fear, like when I faced Ramsey's glare. I learned community is power, from Mrs. Clara's prayers to Lena's bravery. Most of all, I learned a kid's voice, even at 9, can shake giants, because truth doesn't care about age or skin. I think of Caldwell's sneer, the jury's doubts, and Grandpa's chains, and I know we won because we loved harder than they hated. But the fight isn't over, racism shifts, hides, waits. I'll keep teaching, writing, speaking, because Harlem's kids deserve a world that sees their light. If you were in a similar situation, with elements like justice, age, skin color, how would you approach it to achieve the best possible outcome? Would you find your voice, build a quilt, or ride for rights? For the 25 to 55 audience, this is a call to act: mentor a child, join a summit, or challenge bias where you stand. As I stood with Grandpa, the Capitol glowing behind us, I knew our story wasn't just ours, it was Harlem's, America's, and maybe yours, a beacon to fight, love, and win.